Hey, thanks for joining us for our very first episode of Let's Write. We're so glad you could make it. The idea for this series came from a very simple question: what if? And an equally simple response: I don't know. Let's find out. We all have our dream movies. Maybe it's a sequel that never got made, a long-awaited entry in one of our favorite franchises, or a crazy crossover that no studio in its right mind would ever greenlight. On each episode of Let's Write, we're going to take one of these ideas and get it as close to reality as we can, breaking it down from an in-depth storytelling standpoint. Over the course of the episode, we'll do our best to take a serious swing at figuring out each step of the story, and at the end of it, we'll hopefully have a pretty compelling idea for a script. Then, we'll turn that idea into a fully fleshed out treatment and post it on our website. Episodes and treatments will alternate every other week, so if you like what you're hearing, check back often for more. In the meantime though, I sincerely hope you enjoy the show, and without further ado, let's write. Welcome to Let's Write. I'm Ryan Matsunaga, and joining us this week is Alicia Grauso.
Hello.
And Julian Bamani.
How's it going, guys?
Julian, so you're leading the writer's room this week. You've brought us an interesting pitch set in up-and-coming indie franchise that I think a few of our listeners might have heard about. It's Star Wars this week, guys. Julian, why don't you walk us through what you found so interesting about this topic that we'll be discussing today?
Sure. So essentially, I kind of wanted to give a little bit of background on why this pitch resonates with me, or why I think this is something to pursue. We're all familiar that Disney purchased Lucasfilm in 2012, and at that point it was all but guaranteed that Star Wars become an annual event, if not more frequent than that. So we knew we were going to get a new trilogy of Skywalker Saga films, but that was just kind of the opening salvo and a full-scale strategy to flood the market with as much new Star Wars as possible. So after how else are you going to recoup that $4 billion investment in one of the most lucrative and far-reaching brands in history? So alongside the new mainline trilogy, audiences were introduced to the idea of the Star Wars story, which is originally called Star Wars Anthology. And the idea here was spin-off films with a specific narrative focus on characters or time periods as yet unexplored. So Rogue One was the first Star Wars story, and it was met with mostly widespread praise. The second attempt at a Star Wars story, Solo, was mostly written off due to production troubles, but also just a lukewarm level of interest in that character's story being told. So in spite of the lackluster reception of Solo, and contrary to recent reports that these spin-off films have been put on hold, Lucasfilm insists it's still going to forge ahead with these stories, and the current rumors are Boba Fett and Obi-Wan films are believed to be in the queue. In today's discussion, I'd like us to focus on the latter of those projects. Fans have been clamoring for a proper Obi-Wan spin-off film since the idea of Star Wars spin-offs were just, very, very basic initial ideas. Ewan McGregor's charming portrayal of the wise mentor is considered to be one of the few highlights of the prequel trilogy, and he's been asked repeatedly about a potential solo film so many times at this point, we figured, I figured we might as well just go ahead and write it ourselves and figure out if we can come up with a great story. So that's kind of what I'd like us to explore.
Well, I thought we were here to do a Max Rebo musical, but I feel a little misled. But
Airbud 27.
That might have been my fault. The marketing might have been a little bit misleading.
Right. We'll do the second most anticipated Star Wars anthology film.
You edge of tomorrow to the marketing very misleading than what we thought we were actually getting.
I guess I shouldn't have led with the Tatooine band in the flyers I handed out. So I guess I'd like to set a few parameters for our discussion. I think I'd like us, for the most part, let's feel open to story possibilities, but I think there's a couple things that we should just establish. It's Ewan McGregor will be reprising his role. I think that's fairly safe to say.
Is Alec Guinness not available? Have we checked?
I did check. His agent did not get back to me.
It's fair.
Owing to the fact that he is dead. So that
Disney's
we'll see.
doing amazing things with de-aging now, though.
That's true.
I'm sure they could dig him up, just de-age him digitally.
If they can de-age the actor, imagine what they can do to his agent. You know what I mean? So, well, if that comes through, alter our pitch accordingly.
Okay, great.
The film should take place in the time period between episode 3 and 4. So in what we'd consider the rise of the Galactic Empire. And the other rule I'd like to adhere to is we can't break existing canon. So as of the recording of this podcast, Obi-Wan and Darth Maul have a final encounter on Tatooine in the series Star Wars Rebels. And it's in that encounter, we know that they've never met before. Between when he supposedly killed Maul in episode 1 and between that final encounter in Tatooine. So that's I want us to adhere to that, so we can't throw Darth Maul in, in a way that breaks that canon, because that is established canon as of this current moment. And those are my only 3 kind of parameters. Does that feel okay?
I mean, probably more than any other IP, I think Lucasfilm is the most protective of its canon. So we have to kind of play by the rules in that sense and really stick with an era that for the most part is not that written out, but there are some really big events in there that we can't conflict with.
Sure.
Yeah, makes sense.
Fair. So I guess to just kick off the discussion, I think I've been giving this one a lot of thought. I think the story that's interesting to me is one of kind of a crisis of faith as like a general overall emotional arc. I'm not married to it, but I like the idea of the one character that we've seen be like stalwart in his stalwart. It's a weird. I've written that word, but I never said it out loud. Very, very like set in his beliefs and always kind of the mentor. I'd love to see what it looks like to have him shaken up, because we do get to see that a little bit at the end of episode 3. He's sitting on this desert planet by himself for over a decade, we assume. I mean, it's got to take a toll on you. So I think that's an interesting emotional place to mine.
It's like where you go, like either to find yourself or before you find yourself, just a desert planet. You just always get dumped on some desert planet in the Star Wars universe.
The tourism department is like, but you can come here besides that too. You don't have to just find yourself or be on the cusp of finding yourself.
Or be abandoned, hiding out on the edge of the galaxy.
But I think a good reference point for me is Logan in the way that they took a character who had always been very set in his ways and made him actually deal with some heavy issues. And I liked that Logan was the story after the happy ending, which we don't see that often. So that's kind of where I'd like to start.
So kind of with that Logan reference point, in your mind, how broken is Obi-Wan at this point? Because I think Logan is like the extreme of that, right?
Is he broken, or is he just a bit like regrouping?
Sure. My thought was that a fun opening to the film, or a cool opening to the film, would be a day in the life. So it's kind of, a couple years have passed. He's here. We get a sense of he's been doing this thing day in, day out for quite a while. He goes to the place to get his water. He comes back. He waters his plants. He does this. He does that. And it's kind of just like really establishing the tedium of his existence.
Monkish existence.
Yeah. And the asceticism of his existence. And then from there, I would imagine, I don't think he's been broken at the beginning of the film. I would imagine kind of something in Act 1, some encounter, some situation would push him to that final point where after years of this tedium and slipping faith, it crashes, which I thought would be a good way to establish an Act 1 arc. And then your end of Act 1 is kind of where he takes a drastic course of action in light of his faith having been lost. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. I think it's worth mentioning. The Obi-Wan in episode 2 and 3 has that very classic Ewan McGregor stoic kind of guardian, the solid rock. But I think his character in episode 1 was meant to be sort of antithesis to that, especially with Qui-Gon Jinn taking on that role. So we kind of know that element of his personality is in there. That sort of Anakin, daring and bravado and anti-establishment stuff. So I think it'd be interesting to see if that element of his personality comes out again now that he's without that structure of the Jedi Order, without that title of Jedi Master.
I just have to believe that would wear on you as a person, right? Like you wouldn't be able to make it, if you had just undergone this insane ordeal where you thought you murdered your closest friend, mentee, brother, and you had to put him down, but then not only that, but then found out after that he's become the most insidious force of evil in the galaxy, and everyone you've ever known and everything you've ever clung to is gone. It's got to break you down to...
I think it's also, too, that if you were the one that was meant to mentor and you failed so horribly, because it was always the prophecy that there was going to be the chosen one that was going to bring balance to the Force. There was never the flip side of that. As far as I'm aware of, you guys know Star Wars better than I do. there's never a flip side of that, which was there's going to be a chosen one who's actually going to be super evil.
Right.
And so it was always, not only did I screw up the prophecy, or not only did I not mentor him, not only was he not the chosen one, but as his mentor, I failed so hard that he actually became the exact opposite of what we needed. And I imagine it would be, you know, having, I mean, the Jedi Order, it's a religion, and it would be very much like any priest having a crisis of faith, where I think, do I
Exactly.
still want to be in this life? You know, am I worthy enough to be a, you know, to wear the cloth and to wear the priest's robes and everything? So I think it's also that, not just that he's lost everything, but also that the crippling self-doubt too.
And I like that. I really like that you brought up that he would be struggling in light of the fact that he was such a poor mentor, or he feels this colossal sense of failure, because I think it ties into something that I thought would be interesting in a latter part of the film, would be to be him finding his way towards mentorship again, because obviously by the time of episode 4, we have to get him to a point throughout this film where he undergoes the crisis of faith, but where he comes back to the point where he's ready to mentor Luke as of, you know, episode 4. So I think it'd be cool to have him find that sense of confidence in his teachings again and say, you know, I did the best that I could, or I just have to accept my failings and move on, and I can't let that hold me back from trying again, or kind of getting back on the horse. So I like that you brought that up.
Something that might be a little bit interesting to explore is that idea that like I had mentioned, there'd always been the prophecy of, you know, we've seen it over and over in different you know, kind of intellectual properties. We've seen it in Star Wars and Harry Potter. You know, there's always the chosen one who's going to save the world, or going to unite everybody, or bring peace back, but you rarely see prophecies go in the other direction, which again, yeah, you're going to find a chosen one eventually, but there's going to be, you know, every great hero, a hero's only as good as their villain. And then there's that whole area of just kind of like gray Jedi that it'd be really interesting to see him during this time period start to realize that maybe what I've been taught about pure black and pure white, and that it's white is always going to win, you know, light is always going to triumph, maybe that wasn't true. And so it would be, I don't know how to work this in, but it might be interesting to see him kind of go on a quest to start to learn more about the reality of the Force and the universe and the galaxy than what he'd been taught, that there is, you know, there are going to be evil Sith out there, and maybe there is going to be one that rises in power, just as the Jedi, you know, have thought there's going to be a chosen one. Maybe the Sith have a whatever, that there's going to be somebody in them that rises in power, or maybe there are people that are in the middle that they can wield the Force, but they're neither light nor dark. But maybe that's a thing too. So that might be interesting to see him, you know, explore
A vision quest of sorts, or a walkabout.
sort of, but just start to realize, like, you know, kind of realize, and maybe that's how he finds his way back to peace, is he realizes, you know, I feel like I failed as a mentor, but what if I was never meant to succeed? What if this was all kind of
Part of the journey.
bullshit? Yeah, like, or not, or like, yeah, part of the
I see,
journey.
I see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, what if it could be part of the journey, or
Sure.
it could be that he was never meant to succeed in the first place, because what he didn't know was that there was actually also supposed to be a fall and the rise of evil. And I don't know if that makes sense. You guys, again, know way more about Star Wars canon than I do.
No, but it's good. I think you're bringing in in some ways we almost might be too close to it, you know? So I think you're bringing a outside perspective to it, which is good, because I think it can be more than just another genre installment if done right. And I think what you mentioned is a good segue into what I felt like would be the bulk of Act 2. If you guys think it's an interesting concept, would be the idea that he would go on this. I want him to break by the end of Act 1 and give up and leave Tatooine. And I want him to be, because this is a decade period of time. He surely would have had one or two little things to happen and or what do you call it, adventures during that time, and I thought it'd be really interesting to have him actually give up his post, say I'm out, and head off planet, and by the end of the film find his way back to okay, I'm back, and it'd be one of those things that would add texture, I think, to the character, where when we meet him in episode 4 again, you go, oh man, I know where you went in this, you weren't always here just chilling in this mountain, you did something, and I think it also opens up an opportunity to. There's one scene that I really think would be cool, would be to have him head out to Mos Eisley, because in episode 4 he has that line where he says, "You'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy," implying that he's been here before and he's very familiar with this. And what better way to? It's like fan service without being overt. Just have him be there, and through his acting, his facial expressions, just we as the audience know, like, this is where he's formulating that sentence that he's going to deliver to Luke later, which is, this place is a hive of scum and villain, And so I think it'd be fun. That's a fun place for him to play. That's a fun place for us to see kind of through new light. And so I think you're right. I think it'd be cool to see him lose the faith, go on this adventure to find his faith, come back having reaffirmed his faith.
When you brought up earlier the idea of Anakin and Darth Vader, I thought that was particularly interesting because from my knowledge, at least, definitely not in the films, but at least in the kind of expanded canon that I read, there hasn't really been a lot of that period of Obi-Wan's life where he has a chance to react to that revelation that Anakin is Darth Vader, this Jedi hunter. And by the time that episode 4 rolls around, he clearly has an understanding of who that is. He knows that's Anakin, and he knows that that's Anakin twisted beyond kind of salvation. I'd really love to explore, if he is going off-world, maybe the idea that he is going off-world in some kind of reaction to the revelation that Anakin is still alive and that Anakin is Darth Vader. And I'm wondering if, at this point in Obi-Wan's life, if it would be an attempt to save Anakin, a second chance at redeeming his Padawan, or if he's would leave to kill Anakin to finish what he started, and almost like a mission of vengeance in some way.
That's interesting.
So I think it could be an interesting idea to play with, to get to the point where in episode 4, where presumably that's their second encounter, on the Death Star, Anakin and Obi-Wan, where Obi-Wan really readily lays down his life. He makes almost no attempt to win that duel, and he has an understanding in some way that him dying there is a necessary part of the process for Luke to succeed him in becoming a Jedi. And I would love to see a piece of that journey to get there. What changed his mind between Mustafar, where he's absolutely ready to kill Anakin, and episode 4, where he believes that his sacrifice there is a necessary stage of the journey for the Jedi. If there's some element of character development in there where he has that realization, where even if he did kill Anakin in another duel, that it wouldn't matter. Like for whatever reason, that it has to be Luke who has that kind of climactic showdown and makes that decision that he does in Return of the Jedi.
Do you think perhaps that could be him in his journey through the galaxy, for whatever reason that he leaves, encountering maybe people who would become, I guess he might have already met them in episode 3, but I would say people who would become heads of the rebellion, and kind of him just being fueled by, at this point, if he's just fueled by pure, I got to kill Anakin, to have this discussion with them that would become, well, maybe you shouldn't do that, because maybe there's a better, someone to tell him, if you just kill the guy, then nothing's going to happen, versus if you work with us to galvanize a galaxy-wide resistance, this is how you, maybe there's a character who can help have this philosophical debate with him and get him to a point by the end of the film where he's like, I see now, it's not just about killing the one guy. Killing the one guy doesn't kill the Empire. Galvanizing the galaxy against the Empire and showing that there's hope in a different way is what would destroy evil. So maybe that's a part of the way that he can. I was gonna say Mon Mothma, but I think he's already met her at this point.
I think that's good. What you brought up, and Julian, you just said, and I wonder if there's a way to tie that into, Ryan, what you said before about we've seen that seed of him being a little bit rebellious, a little bit kind of chafing, at the bit. No, it's chomping the bit, chafing at the bridle, whatever. Got my metaphors mixed.
He's chomping. He's doing a lot of
whatever.
things.
It doesn't sit easily with him all the time. He's headstrong, or can be. He had to learn and acquire that kind of serenity. And I wonder if maybe he seems like he has mastered all of this only in comparison to Anakin, but he really hasn't within himself. And he learns, maybe, obviously, like by the time we get to episode 4, Luke is the, in theory, the chosen one or whatever. Maybe there's something that teaches him that, Anakin was never actually the chosen one, clearly, but it was my own ego and my own stubbornness that I kept insisting that he was. I was so convinced that he was that I didn't just let the Force speak to me, or because I feel like it's a very much a, almost like a Buddhist, or it's the whole or let go and let God, or like the very Zen, like the whole idea is kind of to surrender yourself and kind of let the Force guide you. But if you are, without realizing it, thinking you're doing the will of the Force, but actually following your own convictions and your own ego instead of surrendering yourself to the Force and letting the Force guide you, then maybe that's something that he learns too, is that he needs to learn a little bit of that humility, where it was, I was so convinced that he was the chosen one. I wasn't listening to the Force. I wasn't really letting the Force guide me. I was letting the other Jedi and letting my own ego and my own impatience and my own desire to rise in ranks kind of blind me to the fact that there were kind of red flags all along with this, kid.
And he never had a choice. That's the thing too, is like Qui-Gon just said, you're doing this. Yeah. And Qui-Gon died, and he was like, the council said I'm doing this. So I think that's part of that too.
Just to the quick caveat there, I think he took on the role of Anakin as Padawan because Qui-Gon died.
Right.
In
that's true.
Conflict with the council, right? So even more kind of an act of rebellion.
Right, that's true.
Honor his mentor's legacy. But I think that what you said is super, super interesting, because the idea that Anakin is not the chosen one, the chosen one prophecy is, I don't think, it's still pretty hotly debated, like, concept in the fandom, and what that means and who that was and whatever it might be. But I think
we've even found them yet.
I think a big component of that, or a big reading of that, or popular reading of that, is that, ultimately Luke was the chosen one who brought balance to the Force. And I think an important facet of that was, in Return of the Jedi, he brought balance to the Force not by killing the Emperor and destroying the Empire and, being the Jedi hero, but by showing compassion and throwing his weapon down and redeeming his father ultimately, who, that was the key to ultimately destroying that great evil in the galaxy. And I think there's something really interesting there of maybe Obi-Wan's realization that Anakin was never the chosen one, but Luke was. And that path for Luke to ultimately redeem the galaxy is not to become a great warrior, but it's to become a great Jedi, and maybe understanding what that really means for the first time.
Oh, and then that would lead him to a point where he would make a decision in full view of Luke in episode 4 to lead by example and not fight, but give up to that's essentially the prototype moment for Luke to do that. Holy shit.
Because what do you think of when you think of Jedi? You think of lightsabers, you think of lightsaber duels, you think of warriors. They're holy warriors.
Right.
But I think the Star Wars canon, or at least the movies, have leaned a lot heavily on the warrior side of that holy warrior than the holy part. And but a big part of and we've seen this a little bit more in the most recent movies, is that whole, and even Rogue One, the whole concept of what is the Force, allowing, we saw Donnie Yen's character in Rogue One, literally is guided by the Force through the battlefield. And that is something that to me stuck out, because I was like, oh, we've literally never really seen that before, where we have a character that gives themselves completely over to the Force and trusts that the Force lays down all ego, all pretense, all of their own wants and desires, and just lets the Force be a conduit for the Force working through them. And we don't really see that in the Jedi in the original trilogy.
I love this because I think as you pointed out, the Jedi of the prequel trilogy are these warriors. They're these like
Soldiers.
superheroes that can do crazy powers and flip and do sword fights and all this crazy stuff. But the Jedi
Which is
of
awesome.
the original trilogy, Yoda, says a Jedi uses the Force only for knowledge and defense, never for attack. And yet we see the 3 movies of the prequels where they are doing a lot of attacking,
Mm-hmm.
And how do we get from that to that? And that, to me as a fan, was something that always bothered me. There's like almost these two a giant rift in between these 2 eras of Star Wars in terms of what the Jedi represented. And I love the idea that we could create a bridge between those 2 eras. And I can't think of a more appropriate character to do that than Obi-Wan, to show like how that shifted from the Jedi of the prequel trilogy to that philosophy of the original trilogy, what Obi-Wan and Yoda represented in A New Hope and Empire and Return of the Jedi.
Well, they've touched on this before in like the Clone Wars and some of the outside the film material, but I love that we would be able to really like definitively expand on it, in that the Jedi lost their way during the Clone Wars. They became soldiers. Like there's been characters that have mentioned like, I don't know if this is the right path for us. We've been sucked into this galactic conflict to the point where we become generals. This General Kenobi, General Skywalker. They're not soldiers. And I think it would be interesting to, I love that we're starting to mine that idea of like, he's coming off of a 3-year war, 3-year war as a general.
Right.
And now has to be like, wait a minute, like what was all that in relation to our beliefs?
I think we also forget too, he's still fairly young.
Yeah.
Like when we saw him in the prequels, like he was certainly older than Anakin, but he was kind of still just a baby himself and kind of learning, not a baby, but he was definitely one of the more, and the characters we saw, like kind of a more junior Jedi. And so he's still not.
There's almost 20 years until he becomes Alec Guinness. There's a lot of character in there.
And I think if we pick up a couple years after.
So you have to wonder like when, and there's all this stuff that happens off screen that we can't guess at, but you have to wonder just in a general standpoint, if you're Anakin being mentored by an older Jedi, what happens when you're being mentored by a Jedi or a person in general that doesn't actually fully even understand, or maybe even doesn't believe wholeheartedly what they're teaching you yourself? Like, how can you be expected to turn out the way that you're in theory supposed to if the person that's teaching you is maybe questioning their own faith, or
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because that's something that is a little bit interesting about their relationship throughout the prequels. Is it's never really consistent what it is. It starts off as he meets him when he's a boy. So then, so in episode 1, I would describe it as sort of like uncle to nephew, right? Because if Qui-Gon is the father figure, then Obi-Wan is for sure the young uncle to Anakin.
And in that movie, Obi-Wan never believes in Anakin. Right. To the very end.
Right.
He kind of almost mocks Qui-Gon for risking everything on this pod race.
Right.
Like, this is ridiculous. You're risking everything on this child.
So then you get to episode 2, where Obi-Wan has now adopted the father figure and very much comes off as the chiding father throughout that whole movie. And then by episode 3, you've got Obi-Wan and Anakin as equals. Mm-hmm. And by the end of the film, he's calling him his brother. Mm-hmm. So it's really, I love that you brought that up, actually, because it's, now that I think about it throughout the films, it's very unclear and the relationship kind of changes, which is weird and odd. And it would surely have an impact on Anakin's psyche.
Anakin doesn't look at him as by the end, as a mentor or somebody to look up to. He looks at him as an equal, and even probably somebody he's soon going to surpass.
Rival,
yeah. Absolutely.
So,
interesting. Okay. So I think it's good for us to start now, maybe getting into some of the
laying out the beats.
Plot beats. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can I throw something out there?
Sure.
And then,
stop me. Wait, stop if you disagree with me.
Yeah. Not the craziest thing I come up with, but so there's this concept I think that we're touching on of like Obi-Wan kind of realizing the error of his pathways and getting to a point where he can be that serene, philosophizing Jedi that he is in episode 4. And I think there needs to be that arc somewhere in this movie where he realizes what we as the audience already know, is that the Jedi in the Clone Wars were wrong. And there's this line from the Revenge of the Revenge of the Sith novelization that I keep coming back to because I really, really love it. And it's the Clone Wars were the perfect trap for the Jedi. By fighting at all, they had already lost. And we know that because we know what Sidious was planning. We know what the Clone Wars was orchestrating. But Obi-Wan doesn't yet. He doesn't understand that everything that that whole concept of the Jedi Order was flawed. The whole concept of becoming generals and fighting and going out there and trying to take the offensive and trying to win something was wrong. And I'd like to see him realize that in this movie. And I think the perfect way for him to do that would be to make a choice not to engage with Anakin again, not to go after Vader, not to kill Vader. So here's one thing. We want to get him off world.
Yes.
We want him to have an adventure.
Yes.
What if at the start of this film, he is in that place where he's kind of losing faith in this concept of waiting 20 years for Luke Skywalker to grow up or Leia to grow up on Alderaan, to train them and to have them be the next face. He's still maintaining at this point kind of a network of Jedi that are scattered across the galaxy. You know, Yoda's on Dagobah, other Jedi are hiding out here and there. They're all trying to just bide their time and wait for this moment to come back. So during this time, he starts to get word, or he starts to realize, or something to that effect, that someone is hunting these Jedi and they're killing them off one by one. And to the point where it's only Yoda and Obi-Wan left, or it's soon to be only them left. And so he decides, I have to go stop this. I have to go hunt down this Jedi hunter and kill them and stop them. And Yoda's like, don't you fucking leave Tatooine. Like, trust me, like, that's not the Jedi way. Stick to the plan, wait, protect Luke. Instead, Obi-Wan's like, no, I got to go out there. I got to stop this. I got to be a Jedi warrior again. So he leaves the planet and he goes on this hunt. And I think one of my favorite parts of Attack of the Clones, which fundamentally people seem to really disagree with that movie, but I think it has a really strong element in that Obi-Wan investigating thing. I think that was a really cool element of his character where he is kind
the
of
Batman
like,
of the
almost
Star Wars
the
universe.
Batman. He's going from planet to planet, you know, hunting in the Jedi archives, going to Camino, like cracking this mystery, you know, as it's unfolding. And I think that could be a really cool element to return to as he's kind of hopping through the galaxy, trying to solve this mystery of who is this Jedi hunter. And at the end, obviously, we find out that it's Anakin. It's Darth Vader, who is his Padawan reborn. And he has to make a decision to either confront Anakin and finish what he started and to become the Jedi warrior again, or make the choice to, this is not my place. This is what Luke or Leia will need to do one day. And this will be really integral to their journey to be able to confront this and overcome this, not through combat, not through violence, but through compassion. And he makes that choice to return to Tatooine and take on that role of the mentor again.
Now,
Go ahead.
Sorry,
I was going to say that's a hard thing to learn as well, when you feel like you are so close to the prophecy, but then to really truly swallow your ego and realize it's not about you. Like, this isn't my fight. This isn't my time. It is my job to step back and to train the person whose fight it is. And so I like that idea of him realizing, like, oh, this isn't my fight. This is Luke's fight or Leia's fight, you know. But I think that in of itself too. So maybe that's the kind of thread that runs through this, is him learning not necessarily his place, but learning to kind of deal with his ego. Because I think that's something that, you know, people struggle with their entire life. It's not to go off top, but like I was just watching, I watched Winona Earp, and she's been like the herald, the chosen one on that show for ages. And then in the very last, spoilers, the very last episode, she finds out it's actually not her, it's her sister. That like, and all of a sudden she has to step back and adjust this whole like, oh, I'm not going to be, I've been fighting up until this point, but I'm not going to be the one that gets to strike the final blow. So I think that's an interesting concept you brought up, Ryan.
That's also threaded throughout Blade Runner 2049, when we think, or when Ryan Gosling's character thinks he is the hybrid child, but it's actually not. So it's
Spoilers for Blade Runner 2049.
Oh, sorry. Spoilers.
No, go for
previously.
If you haven't seen that movie, you're part of the problem. It's
Yeah.
a wonderful masterpiece.
Let me ask you a question.
Didn't even knew.
Do you think it's plausible that if let's say this film picks up 4 to 5 years after the events of episode 3, do you think it's plausible that Obi-Wan still does not know that Darth Vader is Anakin, or that he doesn't know of his. Would you think that the Emperor? Because I think perhaps he could have. The Emperor might have just said, it's going to take him some time to get used to his new body. Let's keep him secret for a while. Let him recover.
During the time of A New Hope, no one, the galaxy at large knows that Anakin Skywalker is still alive. Luke Skywalker knows his father is Anakin Skywalker, but he doesn't know who that is.
That's true.
He
Certainly
was
doesn't know
also,
that Darth Vader is,
like,
him.
pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
I mean, look at, we see in the, future, like Finn, he wasn't even hurt as badly as Anakin, and he still had to stay in that kind of
That's true.
cryostasis chamber, whatever, quite some time. So you have to imagine that there's going to be quite a bit of time. It's plausible that Anakin isn't even because we don't know. We don't know those years, but it's plausible that he would take quite some time to just heal.
Sure.
I think in canon, these were the years where he was the most active in that purge, in hunting down the remaining Jedi and killing them. This is, him at his most evil. Right?
That's true.
But I regardless if we go with that direction or not, I still really keep coming back to this idea of bridging the gap between all these eras of Jedi.
Sure.
And I think the most interesting revelation in The Last Jedi that episode 8 that Luke Skywalker kind of has as a result of Yoda is sort of this realization that the greatest thing a Jedi Master can be is not a warrior, it's a teacher. It's to be able to impart your knowledge to the next generation. I think for Obi-Wan to kind of have a moment where he makes that decision to stop becoming the Obi-Wan from episode 3 where he is a warrior and start becoming the Obi-Wan from episode 4 where he is completely not. He's completely dedicated to this idea of just passing on his knowledge. Would be really interesting to me to see a moment where he makes that choice and becomes that character.
No, I was just saying, not just since you mentioned it, not only that scene in episode 8 is that pivotal because he learns that, but also that Yoda's wider point, if I'm remembering correctly, is that you just have to then let them do what they're going to do with your teachings. It's not you're not complicit in the, like, let go of your feelings of control towards them. Your job is to impart.
It's a parent.
Them your
It's
teaching
being
the
a
best you
parent.
can, and let it happen, which is a great parallel in this case because we need him emotionally to get to the point where he's let go of.
Again, it's about letting go of
His
everything,
guilt.
letting go of ego, preconceived notions, control. It also acts as a nice parallel because, like Ryan, like you just said, that the years right after the prequels are when Vader is at his most evil. But by the time he also gets to the original trilogy, he's, I'm not going to say mellowed a little bit, but it's an interesting parallel that both Obi-Wan and Anakin, Darth Vader, kind of start to grow a little bit more toward the middle, where both of them start to have kind of doubts, kind of maybe questions, second guessing. Did I do the right thing? Am I on the right path? So even though you wouldn't bring, you might not bring Darth Vader too much into an Obi-Wan spinoff, it's still an interesting parallel that they're both kind of on the same journey at roughly the same time.
Sure.
Just, slightly different timelines, but both of them, on opposite ends, kind of starting to grow a little bit more, if not toward the middle, but at least having, kind of mellowing a little bit.
So let me throw this out there because I love what you're suggesting, and I had a thought for kind of the bulk of the plot of the film. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can combine them, because I think it works. So, to my initial, like, kind of beat by beat, like, very basic outline was Act 1, Obi-Wan deals with PTSD, losing of his beliefs, survivor's guilt, dwindling faith. By the end of Act 1, he's made the decision to leave, to go off world. Act 2 is him kind of Mos Eisley heading off world in a quest for this sort of purpose, absolution, whatever. My thought was, and this is the part that I would like your guys' thoughts on, and if we could combine it. My thought was that quest would involve him finding a child and a parent. The child is force sensitive, or their latent force abilities are starting to show. The parent is freaking out because obviously any sign of that is being purged by the Empire, and stormtroopers and Empire security is hyper vigilant to this across all worlds that they're stationed on. The parent is trying to escort their child to a safe haven, a planet, we can figure that out, but somewhere where they would be out of the reach of the Empire. And Obi-Wan is perhaps reluctantly sucked into this conflict when he chooses to take action. So I like the idea that he'd be sucked in, however reluctantly, to this conflict, because maybe they were on a ship, maybe they were on a freighter or something that was making a journey, and the child was on the verge of being outed, and he took action and then kind of just found himself involved in this. And but I think the way it might play into what you're talking about too is maybe there's a pivotal moment where he has to make a choice between his quest to take out the Jedi killer, who he finds to be Anakin, and his quest to keep the child. Maybe there's a decision he has to make there, and that's his pivotal moment where he goes, I'm gonna let go of the reason that I initially came on this, which was to go hunt this guy, especially now that I know that it's Anakin. Like this is a whole different thing, and I got to focus on this. And then that mini experience of sort of becoming more the mentor again and more the protector would allow him to come back and resume that role full time for Luke. So what do you guys think of that sort of trajectory?
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to like just literally paint that choice of kill Vader or, you know, take on the role of a protector, the Jedi protector. And I think that's just a really clean and easy and very visual way to represent that.
It's also an interesting way to be able to bring in, because the thing is, you don't want, I mean, let's be honest, people are going to want to see lightsabers. They're going to see, you know, about something like that. But it's a way to also show that he can still fight, but it's the first time in years that he's fought to defend someone, not to attack. So maybe there's a lightsaber battle or a fight scene, but he does it in defense of the boy and not to go on the offensive. And, I think it would be interesting. It allows for some really interesting, just, not so much narratively, but choreographing wise, where you see a fight where he's not fighting to kill or to maim at this point, but he's just fighting to, maybe incapacitate or to get away or to escape. And that creates a very different dynamic than what we'd seen to that point.
Okay, that just gave me a great idea. So he's piecing together. So we want him to. I love the detective journey. I think that has to be the main thrust of the film. Check this out, because my thought was, who could he reasonably, at the risk of being too fan servicey, we have to have a reason for him to pull out his lightsaber.
Star Wars, we got to go fan servicey.
Yeah, he's got to pull out the lightsaber, right? So who's he gonna fight at this point with a lightsaber? It's canon that Darth Vader trains a group of Sith Inquisitors that are his sort of agents, his little task force. In the Darth Vader comic, that was a big part of it. And given that he's training them, it makes sense that perhaps they would adopt elements of his fighting style. Also, a perfect antagonist for Obi-Wan to face on this journey. Someone not too powered that he could easily handle, but that might be his first clue, where he fights in defense. He's fighting off this Sith Inquisitor who's coming after the child, and afterwards goes, wait a minute.
I know that fighting style.
That fighting style feels very familiar to me. And that might be his first clue that whoever's training these guys, whoever's the grand master of the Inquisitor, what I mean? Like, it might set him down that path. I think that could be really, really interesting.
That could make for like an interesting line, like, oh, you dropped your arm when you did, or something like that. Like, I know like only one person I've ever fought has that signature or that flourish when they fight. Like, it's like, everybody has different fighting styles, so I imagine it'd be almost like a Jedi fingerprint in a way. Like,
where did you learn that? Where did you learn that move? And it might be a cool callback,
or that flaw, or that whatever.
It's interesting. I think I should probably have rewatched this before recording, but I was thinking we're doing a Max Rebo musical. But
again, apologies for the misleading marketing.
If I recall the scene in A New Hope, though, when Obi-Wan and Vader face off on the Death Star, I don't recall Vader being like, oh, what? Like, you're still alive too? Like, I think it was kind of like, it's finally time for us to have our second duel. And, Obi-Wan obviously is not like, oh, Anakin's still alive. He's clearly aware what Vader is, who he was, what he's going to be. it could be an interesting moment to have in the film where they do meet in some way, or to set that encounter up in that Vader and Obi-Wan are now aware of each other, and that 10 years into the future, they are aware that they are going to eventually have this confrontation. And
I love that.
they both have very different ideas of what that's going to mean.
Okay.
It could be interesting that while he's been keeping tabs on Anakin, or well, Darth Vader at this point, Darth Vader's been keeping tabs on him, and they've almost just kind of been like,
Right, and just circling each other.
you stay in your corner, I'll stay in my corner, you know, like, so I think that'd be interesting.
Well, it makes sense for that Inquisitor to then go report back to Vader and say, I fought this guy.
You're never going to
this
believe who I
Jedi.
fought. Yeah.
And he'd say, well, you know, what was his, well, he had a blue blade and he had a beard, you know, like not, you know, he could write it better, but he would tell him, and then Darth Vader would be like, tell me more. What are you talking about?
Did he talk about me at all? Did he miss me? Like, did he bring my name up? Like,
I guess though that while Obi-Wan would be in the dark, thinking he killed Anakin,
Mm-hmm.
Vader would know 100% that Obi-Wan's still alive because he lost. You know, he knows that he might have been like, well, maybe he died on a planet somewhere, but he's got to assume that he knows his master's still out there.
Mm.
So maybe there's this fun thread where he's biding his time
Mm-hmm.
on how he's going to reveal himself.
Again, there's also a very human element to this too. Like, he feels betrayed by Obi-Wan. I mean, it was the equivalent of like somebody that you loved, like, tried to kill him. I mean, they tried to kill each other, but, you know, whooped his ass basically, and like left him for dead. And like, that goes way beyond any like breakup or being cheated on or having a friend stab you. Like, that is my father, uncle, brother, or whatever literally tried to kill me and left me for dead. Like, that's so that moment where maybe that could be a scene where that, like, it's like, you know, you're kind of setting a little bit of the threads where you do bring Anakin, Darth Vader, into this a little bit, but you know, his underling reports back to him, and that also kind of sets, I mean, that's got to be a blow to Darth Vader to hear that, like, the first time, like, I know he's out there. I knew it would be a matter of time that I had to meet him again, but nothing could still prepare me for that, like, kind of blow emotionally.
I don't know how this would be like actually visualized plot-wise, but you know, we're talking a lot about connectivity and how Obi-Wan provides this bridge between the two eras of Star Wars. And you point out something really interesting, that when Anakin and Obi-Wan duel on Mustafar, and last we see Anakin there, he is just like pure rage. Just, I hate you, you know, like the
he's the teenager acting out
he's
against,
just so angry. And yet when we see him, and again, these movies are made decades apart, but we're in universe right now. When we see him in A New Hope, and when they meet in the Death Star, he's not angry at Obi-Wan. He's not rage-fueled. He's not like, I'm finally going to get my vengeance. He's like lording his superiority over him to some extent. He says, when we last met, I was the student, but now I'm the master. And like, I wonder if there's some element in the Obi-Wan solo film that we're creating where we set that moment up, where it shifts a little bit to a relationship of Vader feeling like he's already won, and yet Obi-Wan, you know, obviously decades later, knowing that he's won by laying down his life. I just like, there's some development that happens in there where he stops becoming angry and he just becomes that Vader from A New Hope, where he's just like, now I'm the master, you know, deal with that.
It is very much like the parent-child conflict, where it's like, you know, you're so angry at your parents, and I know better than you, and you're just trying to hold me down, man, and blah blah blah. And then you get a little bit older and you're like, oh, like, I'm not even mad about it anymore because I have my own life and I'm doing my own thing or whatever. Or yeah, like that breakup where you've moved on from somebody and you're like, man, I'm doing so much better than you now. You know, like, I moved up or moving away from, you know.
What if, you know, in regard to what Julian was saying of like making that choice to kill Vader or to save that child and to take on that protector role again, if in that moment, like, Obi-Wan flees and we see kind of the two interpretations of that moment. Vader sees that as Obi-Wan's cowardice, and Obi-Wan understands that is true courage.
That's really
sets
cool.
up that confrontation on the Death Star where Vader sees Obi-Wan as this broken old man.
I love that.
Has forgotten what it means to be a warrior, and Obi-Wan is now a true Jedi and understands what it means to be actually a
Because
Jedi.
Vader still sees, even in the original trilogy, Vader still sees power as might, whereas Obi-Wan knows the true power is being able to let go, walk away, and
We would need to do a little bit of research after this to figure out if we're breaking canon, because again, this is Star Wars. That's the one universe we don't have a lot of flexibility. But if it would be possible to allow Anakin and Obi-Wan to have a second duel, if not one that is completed in this movie, because one that's awesome, that's fan servicey. We get to see them actually have a fight, before they're all old and one guy is in a plastic suit and can't see anything, to actually have a little choreography with that fight, and then to kind of set up that the confrontation on the Death Star in Episode 4 is a continuation of that Vader sees it as he won when they fought that second time, but he didn't get to finish the fight, and Obi-Wan knowing that he has to return and lay down his life at some point. So if it doesn't break canon, there isn't a line where it's like, this is the second time we've met and that's canon. If we could actually have that lightsaber fight, but knowing that maybe Obi-Wan could have even ended that fight and had an opportunity to kill Vader and didn't take it, and I think that'd be really interesting.
Which would be awesome if he didn't, in order to save the child.
Exactly. He makes that choice. Vader doesn't realize that. But Vader sees his actions as cowardice, but we as the audience know that was real courage.
So that was actually going to be a question of mine. My question was, which way you kind of answered right there, but I was going to say, is Vader in the film, or is he just hinted at and talked about through other characters?
I think it's kind of sucks that he was in Rogue One, and so we lose a little bit of our thunder there, putting Vader in ours. But
I think you can do it
feels
by
right.
I think you can do it by making that parallel though, and kind of show, because I think that's really interesting if you build their stories in parallel, showing how they're both growing away from what they were originally taught, or what they originally thought they were taught. But where we see Obi-Wan truly growing more into the way of the Jedi, what it's supposed to be, before it gets tainted by all this stuff that humans, add on top of it. Whereas you see Darth Vader taking the opposite path, and that's why he's destined to lose, because he thinks he is truly mastering the Force in the way of whatever, but he's actually not, because he's actually still, that's the one thing he still hasn't understood, is that you do not master the Force, you let the Force master you. So parallels where they're on the same journey, but they arrive at very different destinations. So I think that's an interesting way. That's also a way to be fan service, I think, without necessarily having to have these big moments or whatever, but you kind of see that their stories they're still intertwined, and their stories are still wrapped around each other.
It's like poetry, it rhymes.
And it nice. And it could be perfect, because if the film is a couple instances of Vader sending Inquisitors after Obi-Wan and them failing, and then him having his Thanos moment of, fine, I'll do it myself. It would work. If that works within canon, I think absolutely that should be a thing, because then you get your big explosive moment. You get to see that original trilogy fight, but done with proper special effects, essentially, and doesn't look like two old people just swinging sticks at each other. And I think it moves. So just to, for the sake of time, just to recap what we've got, can I kind of lay out this new Act 3, kind of beat by beat? Oh, also I'm going to throw something in there at the end as a little surprise.
Sprinkle it on.
That I think is very key to have.
Stop me if you think this is crazy.
Okay. So Act 1. Obi-Wan going through the tedium of his daily routine, but also we're made aware of the fact that he is keeping up a network of surviving Jedi, and they are planning their return to the galaxy. They become aware of that there is a Jedi hunter out killing them one by one. This triggers Obi-Wan's feelings of heroics that he still hasn't quite let go of from the Clone Wars, and he says, I'm gonna go, I need to feel like I'm doing something useful.
Or it could be, just to make it more tied into the narrative, he feels like it's his job to atone for how he failed, so he has to save them, because he still hasn't learned it's not about you.
I think we as the audience see that it is a selfish action, that he's doing it for himself. He's not doing it because it's his duty, he's bored and he wants to be a hero again.
And perhaps in this kind of Act 1 period of time, we could have a scene of, I imagine him checking in with Uncle Owen and Uncle Owen being like, nobody wants you here. Get the fuck out of here. And
Yeah.
just reaffirming his, what am I doing here?
I was a hero, damn it.
He makes this decision.
Could've been a
He's going
contender.
to head out. He's going to leave. He's going to go find this person down, beginning his Detective Obi-Wan film. Well, which brings us in Act 2, where he arrives at Mos Eisley, seeking passage off of Tatooine. In seeking passage, he finds his way onto a freighter. It's here that he encounters a Force-sensitive child, a child of burgeoning Force-sensitive Force powers, and his parent. And he becomes, against his better judgment, becomes involved when a Sith Inquisitor targets this child. He defends the child, helps the child escape to safety. The bulk of Act 2, I imagine, would be them fending off various Imperial advances. I feel like it makes sense for the transition from Act 2 to Act 3 would be for the child to actually be taken by Imperial forces, and Obi-Wan and the parent kind of teaming up to be like, we have to retrieve the child. At this point, Vader, frustrated with the inability of his Inquisitors to get the job done, decides to come out on his own, we think, if it works with canon. And he comes down to face Obi-Wan. At this point, Obi-Wan has to make a critical decision between, do I continue to rescue this child, or do I give that up and just face down Vader in an act of aggression? And he makes the critical Jedi choice to retreat, and they kind of have their duel. It's spectacular. We all love it. Yeah. Actually, I'm sorry. Let me rewind for a second. Right before that, I think when he's at his lowest moment, which his child is kidnapped, he's like, God damn, like, again?
I can't do anything right.
I think that's when I would love for Qui-Gon to show up. Oh, fuck. And Liam Neeson makes his small cameo in the film. Did you just get chills?
Yeah,
I did too. And I came up with that idea and I got chills. So Qui-Gon
You always
shows
do
up.
with
I know.
your
I know.
ideas.
So Qui-Gon shows up and just kind of, it's almost bringing me to tears thinking about the conversation they could have where Obi-Wan's like, I did this because you said this is, and Qui-Gon being like, I know, and I'm sorry. And you've done a great, just kind of like just giving him that talk that he needs, and just letting Ewan just act the fuck out of that scene and just cry, and just people in the theater are just heaving tears. And
To be fair, you are also the person that literally started crying at the Dolby Atmos ad before Infinity War.
So naturally I would be sobbing at this point.
It's true.
Then we get to the point where his resolve is strengthened by this conversation. He's back. That's where he's able to make the choice to retreat and help save the child as opposed to fight Vader.
Or Qui-Gon just forgives him.
Yeah, exactly.
Because not even knowing that he doesn't even have anything to forgive for, but knowing that's what he needs to hear.
Yeah.
Because he's blaming himself for everything. And it's not even maybe like a pep talk.
Sure.
Like, you can do this, but it's more like, you're forgiven.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
So
Insert some really heady philosophical lines.
I absolve
here.
you, my son. Yeah, it's like the priest giving him absolution to go out and do.
Obi-Wan, we all know you have a particular set of skills.
Yeah.
So he encounters Vader. They interact. They know of each other now. He makes the right choice, the Jedi choice. He helps save the child. He finds his way back to Tatooine, his faith reaffirmed. And I'm gonna throw something in here, and you guys tell me if it's crazy.
It's crazy, but I love it. Do it.
My thought was that it might be kind of fun for him to arrive back on Tatooine right as maybe Tusken Raiders are threatening Luke and Owen, and he kind of comes in, steps in, saves them, and then gives Owen like a nod and then walks away and just is like, I'm here. Like just kind of it's not necessary, but maybe just like a moment of action to reaffirm that he's back. Like, I'm back, baby. And I'm going to be right up the hill if you need me, but I'm not going to interfere.
Puts on sunglasses.
And rides out on
an explosion happens. No one knows why.
on a hover bike. Just
One of the banthas just explodes.
Not necessary, just throwing it out there and see what you guys, how you guys feel about that.
Okay.
Does that match with timeline? Does it all match up?
Just like because I think the Tusken Raiders were just kind of a general threat to people living on the fringe of Tatooine.
Can I pitch you a final shot for the film?
Yeah, hit me.
Porgs just fly down, and we find out they're on every planet. We just didn't know that, and now it's canon. So we know maybe the most iconic shot in Star Wars history is Luke staring up at the twin suns, wondering what else is out there. I would love if we could return to that scene with maybe a younger Luke looking up at the twin suns. We know he's done this all his life, wishing for something greater out there. And for Obi-Wan to be there, in the distance as the audience surrogate to witness that as well, for him to understand what we as the audience understands, that is the future right there. That's the hope. And that is the hope that is eventually going to reclaim the galaxy for the light side.
As he's watching Luke, we're watching. Yeah, I like that.
Like it kind of pans away from Luke, and
together.
he's up on a mountain outcropping, just kind of watching.
In his fucking Obi-Wan Alec Guinness robes.
With the pointy hat. Yeah,
but then I feel like it would be symbolic for it to go back to Luke, or the shot to end with Luke, where Obi-Wan quite literally kind of fades into the background as Luke steps forward.
That's true. You could end it on Luke, like young Luke.
Step into the original trilogy, into the next era.
Mm-hmm.
Boom.
Yeah. Okay, I feel like we have an excellent movie here. Can I ruin it with an extra bit of fan service?
Yes.
Right at the end.
Perfect.
Because what if this little child that Obi-Wan has saved is a young girl with red hair whose name is Mara? I'm sorry. It's terrible, but I like it, and we'll consider it.
Oh my God. I just got elevated chills.
Hey, Star Wars is about fan service, so I think it could be fun.
Oh my
Very
God.
dumb, extremely dumb, but it could be fun.
Can you like at the like you say to the child, it's like, what's the child's name? Mara, after her mother, and the whole theater goes, oh.
All right, I've ruined this enough.
Well, look,
but
hey, if they can bring, they're slowly bringing in. They brought in
Thrawn,
into like they're adding in.
It's
so
true.
like,
It's true.
If we were Lucasfilm,
Yeah,
we would be within our power to do that.
fair.
It's interesting because I feel like, obviously it all started with like the original trilogy, but I feel like since Disney's bought Lucasfilm, Marvel has basically started with their movies and built outward as far as tying in all of their media.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Lucasfilm is almost going the opposite direction, where they're taking all this stuff from their outside media and building it into the movies now. So it's kind of an interesting, like, reverse engineering way of doing an interconnected universe.
Great. So Mara Jade, a Star Wars story featuring the talents of Max Rebo.
There's also, sorry, because you mentioned that, and I promise we'll wrap up after this, but there's also an opportunity to bring Ahsoka into live action for the first time.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Okay, I think we need to stop there because you guys are going to nerd out for another
what
hour.
if also Picard from Star Trek was there?
And then the Doctor shows up in his TARDIS, and then then he travels with Obi-Wan. That's how they get from planet to planet. And
Thanks for joining us, everyone. This has been another episode of Let's Write on the Villainy Podcast Network. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode, but in the meantime, keep an eye out for the Kenobi treatment on our website at villainy.media, and follow us on Twitter at Let's Write Pod to let us know what we should take a crack at next. See you soon.